Hi, my name is Pastor Hal York, and welcome to Truth in the Trenches. Today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 3. A stone is heavy and the sand weighty, but the provocation of a fool is heavier than both of them. That's verse 3, but I think verses 3 and 4 go together. And verse 4 adds some clarity to verse 3, I think. So let me read them together. A stone is heavy and the sand weighty, but the provocation or wrath of a fool is heavier than both of them. Wrath is fierce, and anger is a flood. But who can stand before jealousy? Solomon uses some well-known illustrations or examples to underscore a very important principle. A stone is heavy, and nobody reading that in Saul's day or our day is confused by that. We all know this stone is heavy. There's no argument there. The bigger the stone, the heavier it is. You don't need a high school diploma to understand that. But one thing about stones, even if it's a fairly light stone, the further you carry it, the heavier it gets. And Solomon's point is simple. Stones are heavy, and sand is weighty. While a small amount of sand may not seem significant, it can accumulate over time and become burdensome. This buildup weighs us down, tires us out, and discourages us. The phrase weighed down is often used to describe feelings of discouragement and depression, similar to the experience of walking through life with a backpack filled with rocks or sand, which ultimately wears us out. But Solomon didn't write this to teach us a physics lesson. Stones are heavy. He's illustrating something that's heavier than stones and weightier than sand. The provocation or wrath of a fool. A fool is one who mocks God, despises wisdom and instruction, is undisciplined, is selfish, is proud, arrogant, and it takes very little to provoke a fool to wrath. We get a picture of the destructiveness of a fool's wrath in verse 4. It's fierce. It's like a flood. And what produces such wrath? Jealousy. Think about a fool's wrath for a minute. We see the consequences on the news quite often. But what makes it so difficult to bear? What makes it so heavy and so weighty? What makes it so dangerous? Well, it's fierce. This fierceness is like a flood. And what are some characteristics of a flood? Well, it's out of control. It's driven not by reason but passion. Wrath and jealousy fuel it. Selfishness add to that fuel. It's not guided by wisdom but hatred. You often hear people say when they get angry and they've lost control, it's like I just couldn't stop. Their wrath and their anger had taken over their actions, and they were basically slaves to that anger. It's out of control in a fool. And because of that, it's reckless. Indiscriminate in whom they hurt. They're just lashing out at everyone in their path. A reckless driver is a driver who's lost control of his car most often, or else he's lost control of his ability to control the car. And they're called reckless for that very reason. They just damage and hurt randomly, recklessly. And a fool's wrath is the same. A fool's wrath says more about them than it does the person who's the target of their wrath. The target was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. A fool's wrath is not about justice. It's about venting their anger. It's got to come out, and when it does, it's out of control, and it's reckless. And then thirdly, it's out of proportion to the offense supposedly committed. A fool only has one setting, high or hot. Wrath seldom if ever is in proportion to the offense in the fool. You honk your horn at him or take a parking space he wanted, he'll break your windshield, kick your door in. And it's just typical of how a fool reacts. If you want a t-shirt that offends them, they find the offense, then they cause a stir that's unbelievable. They won't stop the whole plane. They won't want the person to get off the plane. They just cannot find any other way than just to be vengeful and wrathful in dealing with their supposed offenses that have been done against them, even if they weren't against them. But it just shows you how unreasonable and out of proportion a fool can be in their venting of wrath. And those are a couple silly illustrations, but a fool's wrath can be destructive and often deadly. It tends to be out of control and disproportionate. We see this far too often in the news in cases of mass shootings, family violence, often fueled by jealousy. We hear of crimes of passion, which are crimes that are so fierce, like a flood and devastating. The devastation reaped upon a person, whether it's by stabbing or something, it just shows that this person was driven absolutely driven by wrath and was out of control, driven by passion and jealousy, and often is indiscriminate. We all saw the devastation caused by a hurricane this past fall in North Carolina, surrounding states. The damage a flood can do is amazing, but it's also indiscriminate. A flood's out of control that's what it means, a flood. You can't control a flood for the most part. And that's what Solomon says the wrath of a fool is like. No one is safe. Everyone suffers, even the fool himself. The fool may lose a spouse, be separated from their children, maybe even face jail time. They lose their reputation. But for the fool, it's always somebody else's fault, or it's always worth the price because they are filled with rage and jealousy. And their anger continues to build, the flood grows, and their fierceness increases because they're always blaming somebody else. Somebody else is always the problem. Remember the story of David and Saul? After David killed Goliath, it says the woman sang about Saul, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David has slain of tens of thousands. So that seems like a fairly very innocent statement. Just grateful for what David had done and for what Saul had done. They both killed part enemy, but David was credited with killing more of the enemy than Saul was. Well, this didn't set well with Saul. He was filled with rage, driven by jealousy. You see, Saul was tall, dark, and handsome and selfish, and he was the king, and he felt that he should have been the one receiving all the admiration from the women, not David. And so Saul tried to pin David to the wall with a spear a couple of times. But Saul became so consumed with jealousy towards David that he literally started hunting him down. David couldn't stay in his presence anymore. Who could stand before jealousy? David couldn't stand before Saul's jealousy. He had to leave the palace. And not only did he have to leave, he had to run for his life. Saul started to hunt him down because he was totally consumed by his jealousy. And several years of David's life were spent running from Saul's wrath, fueled by Saul's jealousy of David. That's the power of jealousy. That's what it can produce in people, and it's devastating, and it's terrible, the results. So these are very simple principles Solomon's given to us, but they're very wise and practical words from Solomon. So just a couple of things to close with, keeping these things in mind. A couple of lessons. Number one, if possible, don't provoke a fool. Don't provoke a fool. And secondly, if you come upon a fool who has been provoked and is venting his wrath, get away from them. Get away. Run if you have to. They're dangerous because they're out of control. They're reckless. And what they're going to do is going to be out of proportion what's happened to them. Nobody is safe. That may be an overstatement, but I think it's wise to listen to what Solomon says. Who can stand before jealousy? A stone is heavy and sand weighty, but the provocation or the wrath of a fool is heavier than both of them, and it will destroy all those in his path. So may this truth guide us and guard us in the trenches of life as we seek to live our lives for the glory of God and the good of others. May God bless.